one of the most impactful projects in Netflix history. Yeah, the password sharing crackdown. I'm that person. Yeah. I apologize. I used to work on things like skip credits and the rows on the home screen for Netflix. Don't ban AI from the classrooms. Instead, have students go home, write an essay using AI, come back into the classroom, and then have them go through it and break it down, and then teach them how to then adjust it in the AI prompts in order to get a better output from what they're getting. It's going to be an extremely powerful tool.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Long Game. In today's conversation, my guest is Jose Moreno, who is a CEO and founder of an EdTech company focused on empowering educators to make data-driven decisions. In this conversation, we talk about his 10 years at Netflix and how he learned a ton from Reed Hastings, why he's bootstrapping his startup instead of taking the lean, mean, agile approach, and the future of AI, both in the classroom and also empowering education. We touch on a lot more topics. I hope you enjoy and subscribe. What goes into the thought process of, I've been at Netflix for 10 years, now I want to start a company?
Yeah. So the biggest, I think what's natural for a lot of people is anytime you end like a really big project that you've been working on, especially over a few years, you start to evaluate like what's next, right? And so for me, that was leading the technology aspect for the account sharing initiative, which was extremely successful. One of the most impactful projects in Netflix history.
And so, does that mean like ending account sharing or what?
Yeah, ending.
Okay.
The password sharing crackdown. I'm that person. Yeah. I apologize. I will say to like everybody out there that I was always fighting on the side of the users as like we were going through that entire process. It was quite an interesting thing. I also like to tell people that I used to work on things like skip credits and the rows on the home screen for Netflix. And so people always like, when I talked about that, love me because of that. And then when
I was saved everyone a bunch of time by skipping the credits and going straight to the next episode. Yeah. And then you made Netflix a bit more money by password crackdown.
Exactly. And so once I started working on that project, then I would go to weddings or something. All of a sudden, I got a little bit more fun jabbing, right? Like, oh, you're the person for like, you're the reason why I can't watch Netflix anymore. Yeah, interesting project. But so we launched it globally. It was extremely successful. That was really, at that point, the question started to become like, what's next, right? And so I started exploring my options. I also knew about like ChatGPT and AI and the revolution that was happening in 2023. I was so busy with the account sharing stuff that I like wasn't looking into it very much, but I knew that there was an opportunity to add in a lot of value in a lot of different ways. So I had that in mind already. So once I started having a little bit more time, then I really started to evaluate more and more. I've felt for years now, just like hearing from friends and coworkers and just other people, that the software that's in education is horrible. Like it's very rare for somebody to say like, oh yeah, this was amazing. And so I started thinking of that as an opportunity as well. And so I reached out to my cousin, who's a vice principal for a school in LAUSD for students with special needs. And I was like, hey, do you have some time to chat? And she was open to it. And I asked her, what's your biggest problem? Like, what day in and day out, what is an issue that you wish would like get fixed for you? And she started telling me about this new framework that's focused on social and emotional learning and just a new way to deal with interventions for students, which was a little bit more focused on teaching kids skills and understanding the issues, and then figuring out like a way to move forward without using exclusionary practices like detention, suspension, and expulsion. The problem with exclusionary practices like that is that it takes the kids out of classrooms, makes them fall behind, and you're not teaching them any skills on how to deal with those situations better moving forward. And so
I always kind of thought it was like a weird practice that you're doing something bad in school, so we take you outside of school.
Exactly.
Like it's just like really backwards from a
exactly.
I mean, in theory, the kid's like, "Oh, great! I don't have to do schoolwork.
Yeah.
That's a good
Oh,
thing."
all I have to do is get in a fight and then I get to skip like the
Yeah.
test tomorrow. Sure, let me go do that. Um, and so she started telling me about this framework, and what she basically said was that her teachers didn't understand it. Teachers have a very limited number of days where they get training, and that's training for everything that they have to do, not just like focused on a framework like this. And so basically, she believed that teachers should be able to handle a lot of situations in the classroom, but because they didn't understand the framework, they were just sending the kids to the office, and then she would get like frustrated by it. And so I was like, oh, that's an interesting place where AI could potentially help if AI understands the framework, right, and has the context of the students and the like overall what's happening. Then perhaps we can make those personalized intervention recommendations for the teachers in the classroom to empower them to like bring back those actions into the classroom and alleviate that stress on administration side. And so that kind of like started me digging into this. And so I started talking to other people that I knew in education and suggesting like what a piece of software like this could look like. And every time that I talked to somebody that worked in that space, they immediately got excited. They were like, this would save me so much time. This would be amazing. And then as I started learning more and more, I learned that like there isn't really a standard practice that teachers or anybody really like has for this framework to be able to say, yes, this is the most effective intervention strategy for this student. And so then I started getting excited about bringing in some more like big tech type philosophy into the industry, which is making more data driven objective decisions or suggestions to hopefully even improve the interventions that we recommend for educators. And so the framework itself has shown a lot of benefits when it's applied well, which is kind of a big key term. Then you see grades go up, attendance goes up, graduation rates go up. But applying it well is really difficult. The majority of teachers still say that they don't understand the framework. And it's been like 20 years since the framework got introduced for the first time. And so if we're able to empower teachers to apply the framework effectively, not only should we get more schools to realize those gains that the like other schools have done before them, but hopefully even improve on the results of what we've seen from the framework before.
How is it different in solving a problem for schools, which I know there are for-profit schools and not-for-profit schools, but
Yeah.
or public sector schools. My question for you though is when you're solving a problem for a business, typically you're saving them time, you're saving them money, you're generating them more money. At the end of
Yeah.
the day, it boils down to just very measurable value that you create for a
Yeah.
business. So when you're working with a school, how does that shift both from a sales perspective and from a what you are building, the product itself perspective, to align incentives that you're solving the needs that they have, but then obviously you're a business, right? You want to make money, so you also have to figure out the economics
Yeah.
aspect too.
Yeah. So from what I'm seeing, there's specific funding for social and emotional learning type, or just in general, the social side of focus for students.
And is this like state
That's
level, Fed, both, something
both.
else?
Yeah,
Okay.
both. It's actually one of the biggest things that I'm learning is that every school or district is pretty different. And then states, of course, can be different as well. And so whenever we start a conversation with a new potential customer, we kind of have to like figure out what their situation is or how they go about like their day-to-day processes and who the decision makers are. Um, but one thing that is pretty consistent and has been consistent in schools for a long time is that if you have higher attendance rates or higher grades or higher graduation rates, you tend to get more funding. And so that is
Performance of the
kind of like,
student equals more money for the school.
yeah,
Therefore,
that's my North Star. Like if we can introduce a product into schools that is able to improve all of these performance metrics for schools, and they end up getting more funding, then the software pays for itself, and we're happy. We're
and the schools are
also,
happy, the students are happy,
yeah,
everyone's happy.
exactly. One of my goals as well with Neulight is to run a super efficient company. I don't know if you've like looked into Netflix's history very much, but I really look up to like what Reed was able to do. The amount of revenue per like employee that he was able to generate when I first joined was really high compared to other tech companies. Even now, they're at I think like 12,000 employees compared to Google's 200, I don't know, 400,000. I don't know how many employees they have now, but I know it's in hundreds of thousands. So they're really small for how much impact they've been able to have. That's my
What
hope
do
for
you
Neulight as
attribute
well.
that to? Like that impact, you were at Netflix for so long. You say that you want to model and build an efficient
Yeah.
company. What does that actually mean from a tactical perspective, both at a 12,000 person company, but also at a 5-person startup?
Yeah. So they have a pretty famous culture deck and I think a reputation for like a culture of fear, which I can semi understand. But the focus that Netflix had was on hiring the best engineers that they could hire, pay top of market to retain them, and then have them like basically trust them to do what they need to do in order to be as effective as possible. So it really brought down a lot of decision making to the bottom layer where you have a lot of people that are extremely capable and can make decisions on their own in order to push things forward. There's a saying that was in the culture deck that I've like fell in love with when I read it, which was if you want to sail the ocean, don't tell people how to build a boat. Instead, make them yearn for the sea. So get everybody motivated towards that goal and then have everybody like work together to figure out how to push things forward. And so that's the focus that I'm trying to bring in as well. I'm not, and part of I think why I haven't raised so far is because I do want to start. It's very different from like other startups where the people that I'm bringing in are very talented people with really great experience, which also means that they're very expensive people, right? Which goes against the like hires like relatively cheap um, engineers and push things forward as much as possible, as opposed to what I'm hoping to do is bring in a smaller number of people, pay them really well, and then trust them to do what they know how to do.
That's very interesting. It's different than the typical lean startup,
Yeah.
right? Of trying to do things as cheaply as possible. And yet you have this wealth of experience of 10 years at Netflix of seeing it up. What employee number were you, or how early were you?
Let's see. I probably like well, Netflix probably had 2,500 to 3,000 people when I joined.
Okay. So yeah, you're in like the second wave or something. And
Yeah.
so you got to kind of see it, and then you also got to really imbue in that culture for years.
Yeah.
So do you feel like you're going to have, I mean, you wouldn't do this unless you thought you're going to be more successful than the alternative method, yes?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's very interesting. And then in terms of the fundraising side, where do you see that factor in? Because also to do a more expensive path and then also to not fundraise, that's, you know,
Yeah.
that's a lot of risk to bootstrap this. And depending on how long you bootstrap it for, what's the thought process and thesis behind that?
Yeah. So it's not too expensive for me right now, luckily. Uh, the philosophy that I've tried to take with a lot of the team right now is, hey, let's do this together. Like I'm not some dude telling you what to build. Once again, make them yearn for it. See, like this is our goal. Let's increase student support effectiveness, right? And this is how we're doing it. And so they've all really bought into what we're trying to do here, and they're excited. And so a lot of the packages so far are more equity based than they are cash based, which allows the cash flow to or the expenses, cash expenses to stay relatively low. I'm not trying to become the next billionaire. I think that's another big part here. I want to be as fair as possible with everybody that's on the team. I know the value that they bring, and I want to make sure that they're able to get value out of this as well, as much as I am. And so as long as everything is like fair, then we move forward. We have deals where basically like once revenue starts to come in, then like they start to get paid more and more for what their market rates are.
Well,
I guess the last thing I'll say is I'll be the last one to take a paycheck.
that's often how it goes, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
I do like I'm a big believer in aligned incentives, and that can be internal to the organization. So, you know, everyone gets paid when we start doing well, or gets paid
Yeah.
more when we start generating revenue. And then equally for schools, if it doesn't matter who your client is, but if you can find the incentives to align, when you do well, they do well. When they
Yeah,
do well, some other party does well, and it kind of becomes this, positive feedback. It's not a zero sum game. So
yeah,
ultimately, if students do better in class and have higher graduation rates, then schools get better funding, and then you get more revenue, more clients, and it just kind of becomes this positive feedback cycle.
exactly. That is the goal right now.
Why is it that software sucks for schools?
I think a lot of it is and that's the big part of having an efficient company in EdTech. Um, there's a big impression that there isn't a lot of money in education, and that can be true, right? To a point, there's definitely money in education. You see Google in it, you see like a lot of other companies that are in it, but it's not going to be as big as writing the next big AI platform that's like adopted by every business across the board. And so that limited, I think, that limitation is what stops some people to focus on education simply because there's a belief that there's a lot of money there. And so what we're hoping to do is if we can keep the number of employees down with super efficient employees with the addition of AI, hopefully they're more efficient than ever before, then the amount of revenue that we need in order for all of us to be able to earn what we're worth shouldn't be as high. And that I think is a little bit of a different philosophy for some companies as opposed to just trying to get to like 100 employees as fast as possible.
Yeah, you want to have the actual impact with
Yeah.
what you're doing. One thing that I've encountered more and more, I guess we all have, is where does AI supplant jobs versus enhance jobs? And so,
Yeah.
where you're focusing right now, maybe we transition to talk a little bit more about Neulight and that the actual product that you've built, your MVP so far. But you're working on educating, empowering, and helping teachers as of right now. Is there any worry from the schools that you're piloting with that you will ultimately replace the teachers in some capacity and start kind of cutting jobs? Because
Yeah.
education is one of those things where it's knowledge and knowledge transference, and an AI has 24 hours a day to dedicate to me to answer every single question, whereas a teacher has to address many students and also has to have a home life and also has to sleep. So
Yeah.
is there any concern or pushback on bringing AI into the classroom or into
Mm,
educating the teachers?
there's definitely no pushback, and I'm not concerned about it right now with any of the products that we're building on for now, or even in anything that I'm even thinking about. Um, and the reason is teachers are overworked. A lot of our educators are heavily overworked. And so anything that we can do to make their lives easier should be net positive at this point. We're not at a point where like they have more employees than they do work. They're on the complete opposite side of the world of that. And so I only see it as net beneficial at this point in time. And we're not right now focusing on teaching students in any shape, way, or form, which would replace teachers, right? It's simplifying some of the processes that they're already doing, which is data collection. A lot of it is manual today, and they have to manage their own organization system and pass that information off to other people. We're bringing all of that online, central place where they could collaborate asynchronously and move away from this like serially trying to all get together to discuss the best way to support a student. And for administrators, they're also overworked on that side of the world. Uh, ultimately, we see ourselves as some supplementary value as opposed to replacement. And we also specify things in that way. We're providing guidance. We're not telling people what to do for a specific student. Ultimately, that decision making stays within the schools.
I know you're in your pilot phase, but where does this go ultimately if you see 5, 10 years down the road,
Yeah.
you see Neulight kind of turning into this much larger company? What kind of impact, what kind of goals do you have set out for yourselves?
Yeah. So there's a reason why we have Neulight, and then our product is named Intelliture, as opposed to just having like everything named Slack, for example, which I guess now is owned by Salesforce, but that's a different. We are having some branding challenges around that we're trying to figure out. But what we're seeing this as is the first product and a way for us to prove our value and what we can do relative to every other ed tech company that's out there, or most other ed tech companies that are out there. We're bringing in a lot of Netflix mentality of providing extremely high quality, easy to use software to get the value that you're looking for, and then be able to get back to what they need to do. And so IntelliTier is our flagship product, our first product, but it won't be our last. Like I said, you hear very little like good things about the software and education. And I think that that's a big opportunity to be able to bring in the next evolution of that software with AI deeply integrated into it in the places where it makes sense, not just to like stuff it on top of things and just say like, oh, cool, now you have a chatbot that helps you with this, but really, really dig into it and say like in this scenario, does AI help? Does it not? Does it get in the way? Or does it make things easier? And so something that I heard from a friend who's a teacher recently was that even just figuring out class schedules is a horrible experience year over year. And so I'm like, all right, cool. That's kind of like a neat little next product that we can work on. And then there's more and then it's more. And so where we want to end, I think is still up in the air a little bit. I think the ultimate sort of place where we can land is a full-fledged student information system that can improve on the experiences that they have today.
So staying on the administrative side for kind of
Yeah.
the full vision.
There's a lot of focus on personalized learning and like lesson plans, all of those things, and tutoring, right? And so I think there's plenty of companies that are focusing on that right now. I don't see as many companies focusing on the administration side. And so that's where we'll focus on for now.
Why do you think education hasn't fundamentally changed in 100, 150 years? I feel like it's just always been stagnant. And there's this, we talked about the aspect of the incentives. We talked about the aspect of people not thinking there's much money in ed tech. Maybe that's a misnomer or just kind of general misconception. But why has it just not fundamentally changed or improved or iterated at all? Is this the best system or is there just lack of innovation?
I think I'll say one thing first. I think it's changing a lot right now. They're figuring it out, and it's a new world that they're heading into. But
is this because of AI or because of just the past 20 to 30 years of technology?
I would say maybe the last like 5 to 10 years is really when it started to change. And education changing is a little bit slow, right? There's a lot of policies and things around it, and people have to buy into it as well. But there has been a focus to move more towards data-driven decision-making in education, which is great. And that's something that technology has been doing for a while. And that's something that we are experts in. And that's kind of like the opportunity for us to bring in some of that knowledge to help them transition into a more data-driven world. And that shift is happening now, which means that we might be hitting this at the perfect time. On the other side, I think, unfortunately, like a bit of it is politics, right? It's up to Congress and even the states to decide how much funding they give to their education systems. And you see like a little bit more funding going on all the like blue states than like red states. And so I think that
is it typically a capital constraint? Like that's again, it's not always binary where it's just one thing, but like, is that the main thing you would point to as being the hamper?
I would say innovation? So. Like there's a little bit of an exodus in teachers saying like basically thinking that it's no longer worth teaching. And a big part of it is because they're not being paid what they should be paid. And so I would say a big part of it is funding. If schools were more well-funded, if teachers were better paid, then you'd keep a lot of that talent, the higher talent for teaching in the space.
I'm a big believer of data-driven decisions as well. I think, again, anyone in a tech background, it typically is just kind of imbued in how you operate. Do you have any good examples of maybe a data-driven decision process at Netflix or Microsoft, where you worked as well, versus kind of maybe a non-data-driven decision that you've encountered in the education space so far?
Yeah, I would say that the biggest, Netflix is all data-driven. Their entire like decision-making process, or the vast majority of it, has been through A/B tests. So if you look at like the Netflix UI, it's evolved over time, but it's evolved pretty slowly. And the reason for that is not because they don't have like engineers that are doing work to try to improve the UI. It's because they're running thousands of experiments every single year, and the vast majority of those do not show improvements in the metrics that they care about, ultimately like turning into retention and additional subscriber numbers, right? And so what I really loved about Netflix was that data-driven decisions were such a big focus of how they moved the software forward. They took the ego out of the people, the executives, where a lot of times you see companies where you have a CEO or somebody else that basically says like, I know what's best. This is what we're going to do. And then like push the entire company to do that thing. And it ends up being horrible, right? Like Chipotle just had a huge blowback over smaller portion sizes because that's just what they were going to do. For Netflix, the ideas could come from any level, executives, engineers at the like bottom of the ranks. And ultimately, like it didn't matter where the suggestion came from. The only thing that mattered were the results from the A/B test. Now, the A/B tests weren't always going to say like, this is the best thing to do, or like, this is right. Like, this is how you want to move forward, right? But at the very least, you get a lot of data to then make a decision based off of the judgment off of that data. And then you move forward in that way. And I saw, once again, Reed, I look up to him. I saw a couple suggestions come from Reed. He wasn't always like in the middle of things because he trusted everybody else to be able to push things forward. But there were a couple of times that I saw him kind of come in and say like, we should try this. We should really push for it. And then we ran some A/B tests. And because it was Reed, maybe you tried like a little extra to change some things here and there and ran some more A/B tests. But the A/B test proved to not be successful. And at that point, Reed would look at those results and be like, okay, I was wrong. And then just move forward. And everybody moves forward, right? And I really kind of like look up to that. And so that's a big part of the philosophy that we're going to take into this company as well. Put my ego aside. It's not about
me. It's a phenomenal leadership style where, yeah, everyone has a role, everyone has a function, and you're all trying to achieve this mission. You're trying to all be motivated to yearn for the C. And so you can have ideas, right? Everyone can still be generative and come up with things that they think might be beneficial or helpful. But then you kind of meet on this democratic or this meritocracy basis of, well, let the best ideas survive. And how do we measure them? Well, we're going to measure them all the same way. And maybe A/B tests have flaws, et cetera, but at least you're all measuring the ideas equally.
Exactly. So yeah, big data-driven fan of how to make decisions. Love that. In terms of like schools, I think you're right. Like schools progress very slowly kind of over time. The way that we even look at children being raised these days with a little bit more of a gentle parenting style, right? Like that's a little bit more data-driven, but schools haven't, I guess, progressed as quickly as just raising children or like the philosophy for raising children. I think a lot of that is just because you traditionally think about like how you were brought up and work for you. And if that was like something that was good, then you just kind of believe that that's the right thing. And it'll depend on the decision maker, the people at the top, the superintendents, principals, vice principals for the different districts and schools to decide how they're going to run their school, right? And so you don't always have people immediately jump into the new way of thinking, which might be a little bit more data-driven decision making. People first have to see the proof that works before they start to transition over. And so that's why I think schools move a little bit slower.
One of the things that I've thought about with schools before, kind of tying into that, is how the cycles of feedback are multiple years. If you want to see a full feedback cycle, you start in kindergarten, wait 12 years, and then you know the outcome of the stuff that you did earlier on. And so, even if it's 1 year, that's still a much longer feedback cycle versus a company can implement a brand new thing, split test it with live users, see if it works, see if it doesn't work, and then move on. So do you see that being kind of that lagging indicator of success being a barrier for you as you enter in to really, you're going to need at least one school year before you can have case studies and go out to other potential schools and say, hey, we did this last year. These were the results over a full scholastic year. Do you see that as being a barrier or not an issue?
Luckily, right now, it doesn't seem to be an issue. And the biggest reason is that we're not convincing schools and districts that this new framework for interventions or student support is the way to go in the future. That's momentum that we're already attaching ourselves to. Like schools,
So
all
the
50
framework has already
states,
been proven. Schools already know
exactly.
it's good. You're just
All
helping
50
them
states are
adopt
bought
it.
into it. Like if you go to the education website, they all mention the multi-tiered systems of support framework. And schools are just trying to figure out like what the best way to implement it is. And so we're not convincing people that that's the right thing to do. Instead, we're looking for the schools that are struggling a little bit more with their implementation of MTSS, with training their teachers on how to make decisions based off of this framework. And just overall, even if they do have like a good implementation of the framework themselves, perhaps there's a possibility of doing it even better um, by having automation and AI provide some suggestions for some things that they may not have seen. The framework itself is very theoretical. It doesn't tell you exactly what to do in certain situations. Instead, it says evaluate the overall context of the situation, understand the motivation of the different parties, and then based off of that, you have like different options of how to move forward. And so you can potentially get stuck in a bit of a cycle of like, oh, these interventions worked previously for like previous students that you did it with, so I'll just try one of these and then not and miss out on some other possibilities that are there that schools may not have tried before. And I think that that's all sort of value that we can help provide.
To close us out, any predictions for what the world of education looks like in 10, 20, 30 years with AI, with technology where it is?
Yeah.
Any trends that you're seeing? Anything that you're excited about?
I what I'm most excited about is how much you can personalize the education experience for students in the future. And so we're starting to see a little bit more with like personalized lesson plans, personalized tutorings, like I mentioned before, we're coming in with personalized student support. And so having that entire experience being personalized to you, adjusted to your style of learning, to needs that you might have that students around you may not, to make it as effective as possible to bring in knowledge, I think is pretty exciting. The other thing that I'll say is that I see AI as a tool that schools are like just starting to figure out how they introduce it into the education system overall, right? But if I were to create a parallel to something else, I think it's calculators. Before calculators, everything had to be done by paper, pen and paper, like go through it, show every single step, blah blah blah, and that of course still exists. And there's always a question of like, all right, with the introduction of calculators, if everybody has access to this, like why do you have to go through all the middle parts? But you still have to have the students kind of understand like what's happening behind the scenes before jumping into a calculator and just saying like this is the answer for what I need. That's how I see AI. AI can absolutely write a 5 paragraph essay like for any grade level, right? Just by specifying write this at this grade level about this subject or book or whatever. But I think the opportunity here is not so much to continue to focus on teaching kids how to write those 5 paragraphs, but instead understanding the fundamentals of writing those essays and being very critical about the output that's coming out of AI. So, an example that I saw recently that I'm pretty bullish on is don't ban AI from the classrooms, like English classrooms. Instead, have students go home, write an essay using AI, come back into the classroom, and then have them go through what the AI essay like they wrote is, or sorry, go through it and break it down. Like, what issues do they find in it? What would they have done differently? How would they have approached it? And then teach them even like how to then adjust it in the AI prompts in order to get a better output from what they're getting. AI is going to be an extremely powerful tool. So teaching them how to better use that tool ultimately comes down to understanding the fundamentals first, and then how to better use it next.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example because I've always felt like education is almost, or the institution of education, I should say, is often against innovation, right?
Yeah.
If you find a cleverer way to do it, at least in my experience, it was often punished, right? You're not supposed to do it that way. You're supposed to do it the way in which I
Yeah.
told you to do it, even if it doesn't make sense. And so kind of shifting that paradigm and saying, okay, well, how could we use these tools? People are going to use them anyway,
Yeah,
right? So it's like,
we're going to use them.
and anyone at an employer, like in theory, education gets you ready to be employed and a functioning member of society. An employer is going to say, hey, use tools to do your job better and faster. That sounds great, right?
100%.
So it's weird that education's against that, but I like that shift of saying use it, but then think critically about the output from AI.
Yeah. Make sure that it's giving you the result that you want.
Jose, if people want to find out more about Neulight or what you're up to or connect, where should they
go? You can visit our website, newlight.io. There are multiple ways to contact the team. And as of right now, I'm looking at everything. The team is relatively small. So easy way to contact me. And then I'm on LinkedIn. So yeah, flag me down, send me a message. I'm pretty open to have conversations and anything that I can do to help, I think, or that we can do to help is really our focus right now.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on the show, Jose.
Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Likewise.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed that episode, make sure you check out this video right here. And if you really enjoyed it and you listened to the end, take 2 seconds and share the love so someone else might find it by clicking the thumbs up button and subscribing. I appreciate you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. But click that button.